We found a quiet place here at our place of business on our lunch break, and I've been anxious to follow up on the last video we posted. Uh, what's interesting is that came kind of off the top of my head because my intention was to focus on the fact that the Commerce Clause is changing the status of Indians not taxed. Somehow, Congress has made an Indian standing something that can be overridden when we engage in commerce. That's like saying, in order for Russia to do commerce with the United States, Putin has to step down as the leader of Russia. He has to become to under the subjection of the United States. That's exactly what this would be. It would be that because Indians are not represented in Congress. The reason why Indians are not represented in Congress, that's, again, we said that's a huge one, because that means Congress is not making any laws for Indians. Why? Because Indians are supposed to make laws for Indians. This is the age we're in, folks. Deal with it. It is an opportunity for freedom. We can do this in a peaceful manner because we finally realize what the Constitution is doing. All these years, we figured that our own, what we thought was our government, had our back. That's not how commerce works. That's why it is really not in the best interest of any group of men and women or nations to have a government that acts like McDonald's or Amazon, because the bottom line is always going to be profit. Now, a lot of people will act like they don't understand this talk. It's really basic. If it were a government for the people, by the people, it wouldn't be trying to get over on people. But corporations are very seductive, aren't they? Their whole entire job is to seduce you out of your money. Let's just put it that way, okay? So Indians have to decide, is your birthright up for commercial games, especially games that require you to not be an Indian in order to engage in commerce? Because when you are stripped of your identity, I'm sorry, that means, again, like Putin has to come here and not be the, what is it, prime minister or president of Russia? You know, he's not going to do that. He shouldn't have to do that to engage in commerce with the United States. Why do Indians have to be changed to black? And why isn't anybody talking about this massive reclassification? If you read the article on iloveancestry.com, at one point the writer, Sonia, I'm not recalling her last name, says that all Indians, all uncivilized Indians, shall we say, were misclassified. Not some, all. So it's almost like saying, as soon as you got rid of Indians, all of a sudden blacks appeared in America that were never there before. Okay? So what we are bringing to the table as awakening uncivilized Indians, because I realized our civilized Indians, I don't even think they understand this kind of language, y'all. I would love to have them join, but they can't join in their current frame of mind or their current. It's going to be a status, because in this corporation it's about status. When you're dealing as an Indian, it's about your standing, your birthright standing. So as a constituent and myself were discussing just as early as or as recent as this morning, the whole narrative about what they're calling American Indians, there has to be a paradigm shift, okay? It is not the same conversation your grandma had. It is not the same conversation Uncle Ruckus had, yo. This is a brand new conversation. It's a brand new day. All it requires is Indians who are ready to be the Indians that they are. If you want to stay Fakians, because let me tell you, civilized Indians are fake. They became Fakians. I don't know if they realize that, but that's what they have done. And their colonizer, which is a Moor, let's be very clear, if Indians were Mongolian, then the black nobility that came here would not be able to change the identity of the American. In order to displace a real Indian, the one taking his or her place has to be someone who looks like me. It has to be a person that can be called black, Negro, or colored. That's why we're called black, Negro, or colored, because we're the American Indians. We are the original copper-colored people or men and women found here. So on that note, this is still going to be a relatively short video. We're going to just quickly read the two mentions of Indian in the original 1787 Constitution for the United States of America. And so we want to do a deeper dive than this at some point. So let's read it. We have here. Oh gosh. Okay, so this is the mirror image. I don't know if, yeah, I think it's always an issue with the mirror image. Maybe you can read that. But this is the 1787 Constitution for the United States of America. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're just going to read the parts that talk about Indians. And what we're looking for is any mention of federally recognized tribes. We're looking for any mention where Congress is said to have plenary authority through commerce. And we want to keep in mind that the first mention of Indian is the standing of an Indian, because that standing says that we are outside of the United States body politic. We don't have representatives in Congress because they're not representing us. Why are they not representing us? Because we had our own systems of whatever you want to call it, of justice, okay? Because apparently this system knows nothing about justice. Let's just call a thing, okay? All right, so we're going to try to post a link to this when we, fix our comment section in our description box. So, representatives, this is Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. We should know this by heart. I should know it by heart because I'm the one that's always reading it, right? Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to the respective numbers of men and women, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons. So this is namely for free persons, okay? But you're adding to those free persons those bound to a service for a term of years, like an indenture. So free persons, indentures, are those who bound to a number of years of service, excluding, I should say, Indians not taxed. And we want to stop there. We don't want to even deal with 3/5 of all other. We want to stop where Indians are mentioned. So the state is basically saying, as we are here, the reason why this was put here, first of all, these Indians are not in tribes. They're random Indians on their land. How did they get there? They got there because it's their land. So now the state realizes these people are still in our states. We busted up their tribes. So now they're standing like sitting ducks, basically, is what Congress is hoping for. These are scattered Indians in the states. But before those states came there, those Indians were there. And that's when you're going to get your colored only, right? Because if they were on tribes, you wouldn't need to have colored only. I'm sorry, if they were on reservations, you wouldn't need to have colored only drinking fountains all over the damn place and all this segregation type of Jim Crow activity, right? Because them Indians, we were free on the land, yo. And the Constitution actually recognizes that. They had to put this in here, y'all, because we were all over these states. We were not on reservations, and so help me, we will not be limited to reservations. What's going to happen is those free persons, they're on reservations. Why? Because their states are sitting on our ancestral land. For us to stand up, we have to show what we're standing on. We can't be standing in a state because then the state is going to get crazy ideas that we are state citizens or wards of the state or whatever. No, we're going to say our standing is we were here before you arrived. To us, in our laws, you are a reservation, and this is our ancestral land. Like it, love it, hate it. That's what it has to be for justice to be served. So that's the first mention of Indians, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Now we're going to jump to what they call the Commerce Clause. This is the same article, Article 1, but it's Section 8. We just read Section 3. This is Section 8. And we're going to read from the beginning of that section and end where it talks about Indians, okay? Okay, so Section 8. The Congress that we are not represented in, because they're not our Congress, they're not our authority. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. Well, we found out earlier that they won't be taxing us because we're, what? Indians not taxed. Okay. Imposts and excises, none of that would apply to Indians not taxed. To pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. So if we're not part of the United States, let me ask you a question. Do their debts have anything to do with us? Because when they create the 14th Amendment citizen, this document is from 1787. Years later, when they create the 14th Amendment citizen in 1868, question is, what were those free persons before 1868? They were not 14th Amendment citizens. 14th Amendment citizens or citizenship is for emancipated, quote unquote, slaves. But if you have two citizenships and every citizen has a dual citizenship, that means you're half slave and half, well, supposed to be half free person. And like I told you before, this system goes with the worst of the two. If you are a federal citizen, you are getting the worst that has to offer. And what is that? Well, we're not going to read the 14th Amendment today because that wasn't in this version. The first original version, the 1787 Continental Constitution. There is no 14th Amendment, meaning they're not talking about citizens here. They're talking about state citizens, not federal citizens, because there is no 14th Amendment citizen anywhere in this document. Okay? We really need to get that. Okay? So let's finish. So none of these taxes, excises, duties, imposts apply to Indians because what? Indians are not taxed according to the first mention of Indians, okay? Excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. That still does not include Indians. It doesn't have to be uniform for us. It only has to be uniform for those dealing with the United States in commerce, okay? So this is talking about what they're going to be doing with their citizens. Okay. Also, Congress has the power to borrow money. Now, that wouldn't be from Indians, right? Why would we be giving money to a government that we're not represented in it? That'd be taxation without representation, right? Okay. So they want to borrow money on the credit of the United States. We don't even want to talk about what kind of credit they are claiming to have. If we can figure out that somehow they're using the resources of Indians and calling it credit. Because if you're here and if you're here in the Americas and you have credit, where did you get it from? Lastly, when it comes, we're not reading the whole thing. To regulate commerce. Now, Congress gave itself power to regulate commerce. Did Indians give commerce? I'm sorry. Did Indians give Congress? I always get those two words mixed for some reason. We don't really have anything to do with this document. They're referring to us because they're telling their people and their government that don't bother the Indians. Don't count them. Don't tax them. They're not represented. So who's giving them the power to regulate commerce between us and the states? Where's that coming from? And if, like we always say, if they're the only ones regulating, how is that honoring me as an Indian sovereign on the land if only the foreign government is regulating commerce? So you're bossing up on me even though I'm not part of your little corporation. Where's this coming from, y'all? It's coming from the only thing that this corporation relies heavily on. We know what that is. It's called the doctrine of discovery. So, although they're talking about how we are not part of their system, when they do involve themselves in commerce. That means they're going to be taking our resources, right? Because basically, when did I got to look up when the Dawes Act, the Dawes Act comes after this document. So they must have had a plan that they would be breaking up Indian tribes to how do you say, reconstruct them into federal tribes. But let's read this again. To regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and with Indian tribes. That's after this, there's no more mention of an Indian. So if single Indians are Indians not taxed, not represented in Congress, not counted in the census, what Indian tribes are you talking about? Because they should be just as sovereign as the single Indian. Because if a bunch of sovereign Indians come together, what, do they suddenly lose their sovereignty because they're involved in commerce per this commerce clause? But what we want to really point out is nowhere in the mention of Indians, we read all of them, nowhere does it says that Congress has plenary authority. When China is doing business or commerce with Congress or the United States, does the United States require plenary authority over China to do commerce with China? That would be no. Because, to be quite frank, I don't think any nation would want to be involved in commerce when the other nation that they're doing commerce with has all control over that commerce. So, again, the contract is already broken, y'all. This contract, if we can even call it that, because I don't know that Indians really co-signed on this. If they were civilized Indians, they don't represent uncivilized Indians, if you know what I mean. In other words, every contract or any alleged contract that the United States made with Indians, it does not constitute all Indians. This thing, from what we are told and from what is in congressional records, United States congressional records, this Constitution is something that the Iroquois Confederacy cooked up. That's what they're saying. I don't personally. There's something up with that because they're saying it was done with wampum beads. Does this look like a wampum bead to you? So how do we know something wasn't lost in translation? I don't know, y'all. But what I do know is there are several other types of Indians, tribes of Indians, right? So any contract that one Indian made with the United States, that is that one Indian. It has nothing to do with all other Indians. So the contract would not apply to uncivilized Indians. But where the United States messed up is they misclassified the uncivilized Indians. And apparently the civilized Indians had to agree to this. Had to. Because we didn't hear them objecting to it, right? Now they are, because we're waking up. So now, unfortunately, again, we always extend welcome to civilized Indians to become uncivilized again. But unfortunately, until that happens, they are, whether they know it or not, acting as our worst enemy. They are worse than the United States government. I hate to say it, but as it sits with me, I have no other choice. Why? Because they're not talking like this. If you made a contract, you civilized Indians, with the United States, you should know this like the back of your hand. And you should have known when it was breached. Because you're not even living this life, civilized tribes. You are in corporations. Nowhere here do we read that Indians are in corporations. So, what am I saying? The Indians that we know of today is, unfortunately, particularly the black ones, that are trying to take responsibility for this system. They're saying, we built this system. And I'm saying, no, the fuck we didn't. No fucking way. I am not going to shame my ancestors in that way. I might shame them another. I'm just kidding. But no. That is a slap in the face. This system came here again. Plymouth Rock landed on us, okay? We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. So we have just read the two mentions of Indian not tax. And for the uncivilized Indian who has a interest in this, because otherwise they'll still be calling you black, and the civilized tribes will be like, ooh, who them black people over there? Because the civilized tribes, they want us to be civilized. Okay, that point blank period, obviously, right? Because they're not trying to get out of their civilized standing, right? We Indians have choices. I say this a zillion times, I feel. Indians don't have to be in any, because the contract itself was broken. There's nowhere here that says that some Indians should be civilized and some Indians can be treated like uncivilized. Nowhere in here it says nothing about that. It just says Indian tribes. It didn't say federally recognized tribes. It said Indian tribes. But then this system goes about to get rid of tribes. So there's only, quote unquote, federal tribes left. So that's how this document is breached. Because they didn't just not include uncivilized Indians. They actively tried to genocide us, okay? That's why this document has to be made void. We're only going to this document to prove that we were never and should not ever again be confused with black Europeans and African, apparently, indentures. Because a document I found is saying that even the Africans that came here as indentures. We're going to have to read it and see what we think. But for now, we might want to keep this under 30 minutes. I'm looking at the clock. Here's the Constitution. We just read it. We didn't see anything about federally recognized tribes, just Indian tribes. But to be specific, they should have said the Iroquois tribes. They should have said the 5 civilized tribes, or they should have said the 5 nations. Because there's the 5 civilized tribes and then the 5 nations, okay? They're both civilized as hell, right? And then when you go on their website, there's a bunch of Mongolians on the website. The 5 civilized tribes, they all got Mongolians as chiefs, okay? So I don't even know how black, quote-unquote, Indians are claiming to be part of these nations when you have Mongolian leaders and chiefs. We'll look at that in our next video. But again, this has already been breached, y'all. So it's void, is what I'm trying to say. But that doesn't mean they can come for us. That's another thing we want to talk about really quickly. Indians have to understand there is no retaliation here, okay? The doctrine of discovery has been reputed. So Indians who feel like, oh, if we start making us think the government going to come for us. Yeah, but if you don't stand up, they're going to still come for you. What was that 50 Cent's movie? free or die trying, something like that. We over 30 minutes. We can be peaceful about this because of the Constitution. I'm never advocating violence, not even what happened with that incident at the White House. We don't. That is not even necessary for Indians. Okay, we're going to the Constitution. That's why we keep looking at it. But we're going to show who we were supposed to be and how this government made sure that we got genocided so they wouldn't have to deal with uncivilized Indians. Although this document says nothing about making a distinction between uncivilized tribes or civilized tribes. But they narrowed us down to random Indians not taxed, standing in states wondering how they're going to get along when all the systems in that state are federal or state. So it was like, oh, to take part in the state, you're going to have to become a citizen. You're all going to have to undo that little thing. We're going to have to get those special cards like the illegal immigrants got, those special cards that say none of your stuff apply to me, but I can go anywhere I need to get what I want because of that is payback. If you took everything from me that I need to get along, I can only rely on what's available now until we get ourselves situated and have our land back so we don't have to depend on the United States. They're trying to make it where we can't even depend on our land, y'all. I don't know how you come to a place that's bountiful and you want to make fucked up food. Why you... Those are damages, y'all. Anything they're going to have to pay for in some way, shape, or form. Okay? You come here, you're in my living room, and you're breaking shit and misplacing shit. I'm owed, y'all. Not just reparations, but rent. Those states are on our ancestral land. That's the legal argument that we have to have. We can't say we're in a state. We have to show and prove that the states are on, like I always say, Algonquin lands, Cherokee land, whatever. We have to show that, okay? And it might have to be a thing where we do have to show up and show out to show the other Indians that we are the only Indians that were genocided on paper, and then just all kinds of little acts of genocide, y'all. There's so many instances of the authorities unaliving Indians. Who's all over the news, you know, Indians. We need a paradigm shift because everything that exists now, none of it is addressing the issues that we just looked at. They're just acting like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. Even the Constitution, as bad as that document is, as bad as this document is, even it knows what we got now, it ain't what it's talking about. So I thank you for watching. Till next time, when we should be going a little more into this and showing what we saw about the Africans. You make up your mind. Were they slaves or were they indentures? You make up your mind. Was there a war that made them slaves, or was it, like they always say, it was a slave trade? Which one is it? If it was a trade, that means it was some kind of commerce, right? If it was a war, then they're prisoners of war, African prisoners of war, right? So thank you again for watching. Till next time, be and stay highly favored.